Let's talk about art history. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artist at Play. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be sharing with you 5 of my favorite art history books. Now this video is actually going to have a little bit of a twist because I do realize that art history may not be people's favorite part of being an artist, mainly because it conjures up the thoughts of reading dusty old thick textbooks with a lot of art jargon, and you know, a lot of people, the thought of like learning historical things just bores the crap out of them. As creatives, we like to do, we like to create, and so I know that some of you are probably like, ugh, yawn. So I decided to choose art books that I thought had a fun little twist that make them a little bit more interesting and not your typical textbooks. Other than one. There is one exception in here that's a little bit more on the traditional side. So let's get down to it. The first one I want to show you is the one that is a little bit more on the traditional side, but I chose this one because I thought that it was a less daunting way to learn about art history in kind of the traditional sense. It's not very thick, so it just seems a little bit less intimidating for people who don't like to, sit there and read a textbook, for instance. And it's called The History of Art in Pictures. And this one does go through the timeline of art history, obviously. Like right from the ancient world all the way up through to modern art. And the thing that I liked the most about this, I read this before I ever went to school, is that it really is broken up in just chunks. There's a lot of pictures, which as artists, we're visual people, we like to see the pictures. And the text, it's just not so text heavy that it feels intimidating. It didn't take me long to read. There is some of the technical terminology that's going to be in here, but I just feel like the way that they've spaced it and the chunks of text make it more digestible. And so if you're somebody who's a little bit worried about reading a traditional art book, I think this is a good place to start, especially if you're self-taught. I read this before I ever went to art school, and it really gave me a great overview so that when I did go to art school and I did have to read the textbooks, a lot of the stuff was already familiar to me. But yeah, so there's only like a few pages in here that are actually like just full text, and it's really when it's like getting into like introducing things. But even then, like the spacing and stuff makes it like just so much easier to read. It looks like there's a lot of text here, but it's like double spaced and just more easily digestible. So if you are somebody who really wants that kind of traditional feel, but you're like, I'm going to fall asleep and I'm not going to be able to finish because it's just going to be too text heavy, I recommend this book because it's got a ton of pictures, and then you're only reading a couple chunks of text per page, and you really kind of zoom right through it and get a good overview of art history as a whole. And it really, it talks about the years, the people that are living at that time, obviously. It just goes right down through the history of it. And I just thought that that was really good. I remember enjoying it and feeling really accomplished when I finished it because I was still fairly new to jumping into art history. And I do think art history is important for us to know because it's good to know where we come from. Any history is good to know. And as artists, I think it's important. Now we're going to start getting into the fun twist stuff. This one is The Secret Lives of Color. Now this one is a little bit text heavy, but the thing that I like about this is it's not just talking about specific artists and why they painted the way they did. It is talking about the bread and butter, the core of our art, and that is the colors that we use, the pigments we use. So this is giving us a rundown of why these different colors are named what they are, how they were made, how they were discovered, where the pigment came from. And it also has some fun anecdotes and stories as well regarding, the people of the times where they came from and how they were worn, who liked to wear these colors. And I don't know, I just thought it was really cool. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. There's another, the hardcover is white and it has just little colored polka dots. I got the soft cover. It's a little bit less expensive. But I just thought this is a cool way to learn about the colors that I'm using or the colors that I've seen in the Masters artworks. Some of these colors obviously aren't even used anymore, but it even talks about Vanta Black. Like, it talks about some of the more modern colors as well. But, like, you know, our traditional colors that we're using in our palettes every day, it's kind of interesting to find out how they were made, what the chemical compounds are in some cases, and it also obviously talks about, like, the meaning behind some of these colors, like the cultural significance behind some of these colors. And so I thought this was a really fun read. Again, this one can be a little bit text heavy. I would just read a couple colors a night before I went to bed. And it was just a nice, relaxing, fun way to learn about the colors that I'm using. So not a traditional art history book, but certainly the history behind something that we're using in art every day. Okay, so the next one was a fantastic read. I really love this book. Now, I almost didn't put this in here because it kind of centers specifically around Van Gogh, and I do have a bunch of books about specific masters. So if you'd like to see my favorite books about specific masters, maybe I'll do another video. Let me know in the comments below. But this doesn't just center around Van Gogh. It centers around the artists that inspired Van Gogh. So you're not just getting an insight into Van Gogh's mind, which is always very interesting, but you're also, like, finding out who inspired him and how they inspired him, and it compares the works. And he really did look at a lot of artists from his time and from before him and study them and got a lot of ideas about composition from them and color use. So even though he really is an artist all on his own, like, he's very different, you know, he stands out. He actually was very heavily influenced by other artists, as many of us are. And so I just think it's really interesting to find out who this genius of an artist was inspired by, even though you wouldn't necessarily be able to draw that line immediately just by looking at Van Gogh's work. So learning a lot about his thinking and learning a lot about the artists that inspired him and that came before him and his contemporaries. So I thought that this was a really cool book. And of course, it's got a lot of beautiful artwork in it. And like I said, it compares artworks and things like that. His art next to other masters' artworks. And yeah, I just thought that it was a really cool concept. And it would be neat if they did it about other artists too. I don't know if they have. But I really, really enjoyed this book. And so another non-traditional way to look at art by other artists who have come before us. Very interesting. Okay, so the next one I had a special interest in because I am a woman in art. And women in art are not talked about a whole lot, as we all know. They're just not. And so I thought this was a fun book. This book honestly could be used for many different ages because obviously, like, look how beautiful it is. It's not overly heavy. And it also talks about elements and principles of art and design. And it's just such a beautiful book. Like, it is so artistic in and of itself. And again, it's not going to be too overwhelming. So if you are a woman in art and you want to learn about other women in art, this is a great snapshot. And it's just a fun and beautiful book to spend some time with. Again, the design of it is beautiful. The illustrations are fantastic. The colors. And it really goes through a bunch of artists, some of them who you may have never heard of because they're not in other art textbooks. They're just not talked about as much as the male masters. You know, it's very, very interesting. And it goes through the timeline. So we're starting out very early on in history and working our way through to modern art. And it just, you know, shows the different ways that these women have influenced art, even if we don't realize it because we haven't heard of them. Many of them were overshadowed by their male contemporaries. And so some of them have actually very much influenced their male contemporaries. And you learn a little bit about that, and I just love it. I thought this book was just so much fun, and it goes through some art tools, so it's not just art history. It breaks it up a little bit. But look how beautiful this book is. It looks very illustrative. It looks, so you could get this for your teenage daughter who shows interest in art, or you could buy it for yourself because it is, you know, it's information that we could all use. And so I thought it was a fantastic book, fantastic read. I took it outside many times during the spring when I first got it, and I was out on my porch reading it, and it's just beautiful, informative, and it takes a look at artists who we don't know enough about to begin with. They don't get the recognition they deserve, and that's one of my favorite things about it all around. Highly recommend. Okay, so the last one I'm going to show you is The Secret Lives of Great Artists. This is like the tabloids of artists, and it's actually kind of fun. I'm actually still reading it because I had started reading it a while back, and then I'm somebody who I don't consistently read, so like sometimes I'll put the book down, then I'll just come back to it later on, and that's what I did with this one. And I mean, sometimes I read something all the way through, but this one is a lot of fun. Now, it's not as racy as it implies by the cover, but you will learn the nitty-gritty about these famous artists. You will learn who was involved with domestic violence. You will learn who has gone to jail. You will learn who was the playboy and who was the outcast. Like, you'll learn all the down and dirty about these artists, but you also learn about their lives and their famous works and what inspired them and things like that. So it has a lot of the traditional art history aspects to it, but it also kind of shines the light into the darkness behind these famous artists, and it's really interesting in that way. There doesn't have a lot of pictures, and it will describe their famous works really well. So if you're not necessarily familiar with their famous work at the time, you may have to Google it or something like that. But it definitely gives you an interesting snapshot, and it has a lot of artists in here. Again, this goes through, it starts very early on with Van Eyck, and it goes all the way through, you know, chronologically, all the way up to Andy Warhol. And so definitely find out the nitty-gritty of them, but also a good overview of their life, what inspired them, and why they made the work that they did. All right, so those are my favorite art history books. This is kind of a quick video, but I just wanted to give you a rundown. This is probably the thickest. And I do have a few others that I haven't read yet that may become my favorites in the future, but definitely recommend each of these books if you want to learn more about like how art has become what it is today, and you know, our forefathers and foremothers in the art field. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you'd like me to do another one where I show you my favorite books about specific masters or anything like that, let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit subscribe, hit that thumbs up, and also the notification bell so you can be informed about other videos that I do where I actually create a lot of art. I do a lot of different art supply reviews and book reviews and all that fun jazz. So follow along if that interests you. All right, thank you. I will see you next week. You have a fantastic day. Bye.